Right now, inside your bloodstream, your body is, well, it's forging millions of microscopic keys to fit biological locks that don't even exist yet.
Which is pretty wild to think about.
It really is. It's this vast, invisible defense network operating just under your skin that, I mean, most of us never give a second thought to, at least, until something goes wrong.
Right, until you get sick.
Exactly. So if you are listening to this, maybe you're a student prepping for some grueling medical terminology course, or maybe you're just insanely curious about how exactly you managed to survive that nasty cold last week.
Both are very valid reasons to be here.
Definitely. Either way, you are in the right place because we have this massive stack of sources in front of us today. We're talking everything from clinical notes to anatomical research and, frankly, centuries of medical history.
Yeah, we are tracing a very specific scientific lineage today. We're looking at three foundational roots of your body's defense network. So that's immuno, lympho, and spleno.
Okay, let's unpack this because these medical terms are not just, static vocabulary words you memorize for a multiple choice test.
Right, they aren't just dead words.
No, they are historical records of a constantly shifting scientific understanding. And looking at the sources, it is really striking how the ancient meanings of these words perfectly illustrate how totally wrong early medicine was at the beginning.
Oh, completely wrong. I mean, we really have to begin at the literal root here. Take the term immuno.
Right, immunity.
Yeah, when we hear immunity today, we immediately think of, white blood cells, vaccines, antibodies. But the root actually comes from the Latin word immunis, which had absolutely nothing to do with biology.
Wait, nothing at all.
Nothing. It was strictly a legal and tax term. It literally meant exempt.
Oh.
Like if you were a Roman citizen who was excused from public service or civic duty, you were immunis.
Wow, so early physicians basically just borrowed a legal concept to describe a body that was excused or, exempt from a disease.
Exactly. If you survived a plague, you were granted this physiological tax break. You were exempt from catching it again.
I love that, a physiological tax break.
It's a great metaphor, but the danger of that early legal concept was that it made doctors view immunity as this very rigid binary state.
Like an on-off switch.
Right. In the 19th century, the model was essentially an army versus invaders. You either had smallpox or your army had defeated it and you were immune. There was just no nuance.
Which is completely divorced from how we view it today. Modern immunology, it does not look at the body as an army fighting bugs. It is more like a constantly negotiated ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a much better way to frame it.
Right, because your immune system is this highly graded surveillance network. It is constantly distinguishing self from non-self. And not just outside invaders, but distinguishing damaged self from healthy self.
What's fascinating here is how the vocabulary stayed exactly the same, while the biological definition turned completely upside down.
Yeah, totally inverted.
And the why behind this paradigm shift is crucial for modern medicine. Once we realize the immune system is a complex surveillance ecosystem rather than just a blunt force army, we actually start to understand why things go wrong.
Right, because the same precise system that protects you from a virus can lose calibration.
Exactly. When it loses the ability to distinguish self from non-selves, it might attack your pancreas, which causes type 1 diabetes, or your joints, causing rheumatoid arthritis.
So that's autoimmunity.
Right. Or it might overreact to a harmless protein, like, say, pollen or a peanut, resulting in severe allergies.
It's crazy that we still use a Roman tax term to describe this incredibly complex biological balancing act.
It is pretty ironic.
But it isn't the only root with a bizarre origin. Let's look at lympho. That comes from the Latin lympha, meaning clear water or spring water.
Yeah, which Roman writers associated with Lympha, who is a minor goddess of fresh water.
So early anatomists cut open a body, saw this clear fluid inside the vessels, and just named it after water based entirely on its limpid clarity. They completely ignored its actual function.
They completely missed the point of what it did. But naming biological structures based on visual appearance rather than functional mechanism is, well, it's a recurring theme in early medicine.
Oh, for sure.
We see the exact same logic applied to our third root, which is spleno. That comes from the Greek word for spleen.
Oh, right. This one ties all the way back to the ancient four humors theory.
Yeah, Aristotle and Galen.
Right. They believed human health was governed by four fluids, and the spleen was considered the seat of black bile. It was the organ responsible for melancholy and, bizarrely, for laughter.
Which makes no sense to us now.
None at all. But that is exactly where the phrase venting your spleen comes from. The prevailing thought was that when you got angry, you're literally venting your excess black bile.
So if those early definitions were based entirely on, you know, tax law, clear water, and imaginary black bile, the obvious question is, how did we actually figure out the real biology?
How do we get to the truth?
Yeah. And the historical documents point to a mechanism of discovery that wasn't exactly driven by peaceful, polite collaboration.
No, not at all. Looking at this, wait, so the foundational knowledge of our body's most critical defense system was basically driven by academic turf wars and petty feuds over who saw it first.
Pretty much, yeah. Essentially a series of high-stakes turf wars. Take the first major breakthrough in 1796. Edward Jenner performs the first scientific vaccination.
He inoculates the 8-year-old boy with cowpox.
Right, to protect him from smallpox.
Yeah.
And it is a massive practical success. The child is protected.
But Jenner had a profound conceptual problem.
Exactly. He had absolutely no theoretical vocabulary to explain why it worked. The biology of what was actually happening under the skin was just a total black box.
And that box stayed closed until the 1880s, when it sparked one of the most famous feuds in medical history.
Between Elie Metchnikoff and Paul Ehrlich.
Right, so Metchnikoff is a Russian zoologist working in Messina, Italy in 1882. He is looking at these transparent starfish larvae under a microscope.
Which is a brilliant experimental setup, by the way, because they're transparent.
Totally. So he takes a tiny rose thorn and inserts it into the larva. The next morning, he looks through the lens and sees mobile cells swarming the thorn, physically engulfing it.
Right, he names this phagocytosis.
Literally cell eating. He declares that immunity is cellular. It's like tiny biological Pac-Men eating the invaders.
But over in Germany, Paul Ehrlich fundamentally disagreed with the Pac-Man theory.
Oh, he hated it.
Ehrlich argued that immunity wasn't about cells physically eating things. He championed humoral immunity. He believed the protection resided in invisible chemical substances dissolved in the blood serum.
Which he called antibodies.
Right. He theorized these chemicals neutralize toxins from a distance without ever needing a cell to swallow anything.
So you've got the Russian and French Pasteurians screaming, it's the cells, while the German researchers are screaming, it's the serum. And they feud publicly for over 2 decades.
It was incredibly heated.
So the modern understanding of our immune system is basically the result of a petty feud.
The feud was undeniably petty, yes. But those bitter disputes actually drove incredibly rigorous proof.
Because they had to prove each other wrong.
Exactly. Both sides were forced to design increasingly sophisticated experiments just to prove the other guy wrong. And the synthesis of those two stubborn viewpoints formed the bedrock of our modern understanding.
Which all came to a head in 1908.
Right, when the Nobel Committee forced them to share the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine.
Which must have been awkward.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
But it was the scientific community's way of establishing that cellular immunity and humoral immunity actually work together in a coordinated system.
Right. The antibodies tag the invaders, and the phagocytes eat the tagged targets.
Exactly. And the exact same pattern of competitive discovery happened with the lymphatic system back in the 17th century.
Oh, with Gaspar Uccelli?
Right. He is dissecting a well-fed dog in 1622, and he notices these white, milky veins in the gut that he had never seen in starved animals.
So it had discovered the lacteals.
Yes, the specific lymphatic vessels that carry digested dietary fat.
And that single observation just set off a frantic race to map the rest of the lymphatic network. By the 1650s, this erupted into a vicious priority dispute between Thomas Bartholin, a Danish anatomist, and Annelies Rudbeck, a Swedish researcher.
They both independently mapped the lymphatic system and then spent years trying to destroy each other's reputations over who deserved the credit.
Bartholin ultimately won the naming rights, coining the term lymphatic vessels, which, cemented that clear water route we still use today.
Right. But mapping the anatomical parts through competitive spite is one thing. Understanding the mechanisms behind those parts is a totally different challenge.
Yeah, and moving into the 20th century, we see this incredible arrogance in modern medicine. Doctors had mapped these networks, but because they didn't really understand how the organs functioned, they confidently assumed a lot of them were just useless vestigial leftovers.
Yeah, the human body was often viewed as a museum of obsolete evolutionary junk. The thymus, which uses the root thymo, is a perfect example of this.
It sits right behind the sternum, right?
Yes, and for a long time, it was completely dismissed as a functionless gland in adults. That dogma persisted for decades until Jacques Miller, working in London in 1961, decided to surgically remove the thymus from newborn mice.
And suddenly, those mice developed severe immune deficiencies. They couldn't even mount a defense to reject foreign skin grafts.
Right. That single experiment proved the thymus wasn't just a useless blob of tissue. It is a crucial biological factory.
It's where specific white blood cells mature.
Exactly. They mature into targeted assassins. In fact, those cells are called T lymphocytes, and the T literally stands for thymus.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the exact same arrogance created the vestigial spleen myth.
Oh, this is a huge one.
For decades in the 20th century, if you got into a minor car accident and your chest hit the steering wheel, bruising your spleen, trauma surgeons would just casually remove it.
Like it was an appendix.
Exactly. They treated it like a useless appendix.
Well, the justification was that the liver also filters blood, so they just assumed the spleen's filtering capacity was entirely redundant. The problem was they weren't tracking the long-term post-operative data.
Right. And when they finally did track that data, they realized they had made a catastrophic error. Patients missing their spleens were developing OPSI.
Overwhelming post-splenectomy infection.
Right. It's this rare but massive bacterial infection with a 50 to 70% mortality rate. The doctors who were casually removing the spleen failed to realize it is a highly specialized, non-redundant blood filter.
The spleen's internal architecture houses specific immune cells that are uniquely positioned to trap and destroy encapsulated blood-borne bacteria.
And the liver just can't do that.
The liver cannot replicate that specific immunological function, no. Today, trauma surgeons will perform really complex salvage operations to save even a fraction of a damaged spleen.
And if a patient absolutely must have their spleen removed, they have to get a lifelong panel of extra vaccines, right?
Like pneumococcus and the meningococcus, just to chemically replicate the biological shield they lost.
Understanding that organs like the spleen are vital filtering checkpoints was a massive hurdle, but we saw the ultimate proof of how vital this entire system is in the 1970s with David Vetter.
Widely known as the bubble boy.
Right.
David was born in 1971 with severe combined immunodeficiency, or SCID. It's a genetic failure where the body's bone marrow simply cannot generate functional T cells from the thymus, or antibody-producing B cells.
So he lived almost his entire 12-year life inside a sterile plastic isolation chamber because exposure to even a single common cold virus could have been fatal for him.
His life was a highly visible public demonstration of what happens when the immunosystem fails entirely.
But David's tragic story proved we needed to figure out how to rebuild immune systems from scratch.
Through bone marrow transplants.
Exactly. And you cannot rebuild a defense network if you don't know how it targets threats in the first place.
Which brings us to a major conceptual hurdle. To rebuild the system, we had to unlearn massive, fundamental assumptions about how antibodies actually work. We really need to look at the debate between instructive theory and clonal selection.
Right. Back in the mid-20th century, brilliant scientists like Linus Pauling pushed the instructive theory.
Which made a lot of sense at the time.
It did. The idea was that an antibody was basically a blank piece of biological clay. When a virus entered the body, the antibody would physically wrap around it, molding itself directly to the specific shape of that invader.
Like I said, it makes intuitive sense from an engineering perspective. You encounter a novel problem, so you construct a specific customized tool to solve it right on the spot.
But in 1957, an Australian scientist named Macfarlane Burnet proposed something entirely different.
The clonal selection theory.
Right. Burnet argued that the body doesn't mold anything on the spot. Instead, you already possess a vast, pre-existing library of immune cells.
And each one carries a totally random, unique receptor.
When an infection enters, it just floats around until it bumps into the one specific cell that happens to be a perfect structural match. Once that match is made, that specific cell is selected, and it clones itself millions of times to fight the infection.
Burnet was essentially claiming that the answer exists inside your biology long before the question is ever asked.
I was trying to visualize this, and it's like a locksmith. Linus Pauling's theory is like a burglar breaking into your house, and the locksmith runs over, looks at the burglar's specific lockpicks, and frantically forges a brand new key from raw metal to lock the door.
Right, a custom reaction.
But Burnet's theory says the locksmith has a wall with billions of random pre-cut keys already hanging on it. He doesn't even look at the burglar's tools. He just starts shoving every single pre-cut key into the door until, miraculously, one turns.
And then he makes a million copies of that specific key.
Exactly. But wait, I have to challenge this.
Go ahead.
That seems wildly inefficient. Why would the human body waste immense amounts of metabolic energy building millions of random useless receptors for diseases we might never even encounter in our entire lives?
It sounds inefficient until you view it through the lens of evolutionary survival.
Okay, how so?
Well, a virus mutates and replicates in hours. If your body had to analyze a novel virus and custom build an entirely new protein to fight it from scratch, you would die from the infection long before the manufacturing process was finished.
Oh, the delay would kill you.
Exactly.
Right.
By pre-generating billions of random keys, the body guarantees that when a completely novel mutated virus eventually shows up, a key that roughly fits already exists. It trades metabolic efficiency for absolute reaction speed.
That is brilliant.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this pre-generated library requires constant, accurate stimulation to know which keys to use and which to permanently ignore.
Which sets up David Strachan's research in 1989 and the hygiene hypothesis.
Right. Strachan observed this really interesting epidemiological trend. Children growing up in larger households where they were constantly exposed to their older siblings' germs actually demonstrated significantly lower rates of allergic diseases like hay fever and eczema.
The modern refinement of this is the microbiome, or the old friends hypothesis.
Yeah, it is not about just rolling in dirt.
No, it's about beneficial microbial exposure. Our immune system evolved over millions of years, expecting a baseline level of environmental training from harmless microbes.
So when we place that system into highly sterile, modern environments, the immune system lacks the required training data.
It becomes miscalibrated.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Instead of learning to ignore harmless environmental proteins like pollen or pet dander, it treats them as lethal threats and launches a massive systemic inflammatory attack.
Which completely reframed our understanding of allergic and autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, they aren't symptoms of a fundamentally weak immune system. They are symptoms of a highly armed system that just lacks accurate targeting data.
It's funny, we tend to mislabel the physical symptoms of those systemic attacks all the time. For instance, people constantly talk about their lymph glands being swollen when they're fighting off an infection.
The terminology there is very deceptive. We call them lymph glands, but they are not secreting anything like a sweat gland or a salivary gland does.
They're purely structural checkpoints.
Right. They're densely packed biological filters situated along the lymphatic vessels.
So when my neck is swollen and sore during a bad cold, what is physically happening inside that tissue? Because, the immediate reaction for a lot of people is sheer panic. They feel a lump and assume it's cancer.
Well, a painful swollen lymph node during a respiratory illness is actually proof your internal surveillance system is functioning correctly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the node is swelling because it is rapidly multiplying those specific cloned immune cells we discussed earlier and physically trapping the viral debris from the battlefield. It is essentially a localized quarantine zone.
So the pain is actually a good sign.
Usually, yes. Cancerous nodes typically present differently. They tend to be painless, hard, and persistently enlarged without any underlying infection.
These broken dogmas and structural mechanisms, they aren't just academic history. They are driving the major medical headlines we see today.
Absolutely. The conceptual shifts we're discussing represent the foundation of modern billion-dollar clinical breakthroughs. Take the field of cancer immunotherapy and drugs like pembrolizumab.
Right.
For decades, oncology mostly relied on poisoning rapidly dividing cells or burning them with radiation.
But immunotherapy is a direct application of Mechnikov's cellular immunity concept. It turns out tumors are incredibly deceptive. They survive by deploying a specific protein handshake that tricks the passing T cells into thinking the tumor is healthy tissue.
It effectively puts the T cells' attack mechanisms to sleep.
Exactly. And drugs like pembrolizumab physically block that deceptive protein handshake. They release the molecular brakes on your own T cells, allowing your endogenous immune system to recognize the tumor as damaged self and destroy it.
We are simply removing the blindfold from the body's native surveillance network.
And we also saw the mechanics of the lymph system playing out on a global scale during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, definitely.
Millions of people received vaccinations, and shortly after, clinics saw a significant wave of women coming in for mammograms, showing swollen lymph nodes under their arms.
Which naturally caused severe clinical alarm, because enlarged axillary lymph nodes on a mammogram can be a primary indicator of breast cancer metastasis.
But it wasn't metastasis, it was just the localized filter checkpoints doing their job.
Right, because the vaccine was injected into the deltoid muscle in the shoulder.
And the nearest lymphatic filters are located right in the armpit. Those nodes swelled up precisely because they were processing the vaccine material and generating the specific immune keys required for protection.
The biological mechanics were so consistent that radiology societies had to formally change their screening guidelines. They actually advised patients to wait several weeks post-vaccination before undergoing routine mammography.
It perfectly illustrates why understanding the physical pathways of the lymph system dictates everyday clinical practice.
It really does. But perhaps the most stunning modern example of how rapidly this field is still shifting occurred just recently, in 2015.
With the discovery by researchers Louveau and Kipnis at the University of Virginia.
Yes. This is the discovery that literally forced publishers to rewrite anatomical textbooks.
Because for roughly 300 years, dating back to 1727, it was an established, unquestionable dogma in medicine that the human brain contained absolutely no lymphatic vessels.
It was considered a settled anatomical fact. The central nervous system was thought to be entirely immune privileged and structurally isolated from the lymphatic network.
Until they looked closer.
Right. These researchers were examining the meninges, which are the protective membranes wrapping the brains of mice, and they were utilizing new imaging techniques. And they discovered fully functional lymphatic vessels hiding right there in the tissue.
It was such a paradigm-breaking revelation that the broader scientific community actually spent months rigorously trying to disprove the findings before finally accepting them.
And the clinical implications of this are just staggering. If the brain possesses a dedicated lymphatic drainage system, it means that system is susceptible to degradation and failure.
Which has unlocked entirely new avenues of research into neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease.
Exactly. Researchers are now investigating whether a functional decline in this newly mapped lymphatic clearance system is the primary reason toxic amyloid plaques are allowed to accumulate in the brain as we age.
Those are the destructive protein tangles that suffocate brain cells.
Right.
So what does this all mean? We started by talking about Roman tax laws and ancient theories of black bile, and we end up looking at potential structural causes for Alzheimer's.
It highlights that immune surveillance is this relentless, invisible force field operating inside you every second of every day.
It's not just fighting colds.
No, it isn't merely fighting off the pathogen you encountered on a doorknob. It is actively patrolling your tissues for malignant mutations. It is calibrating your inflammatory responses based on the microbial diversity in your gut. And it is highly probable that it is actively draining toxic protein byproducts from your brain tissue as we speak.
We have traced the remarkable trajectory of these three roots today: immuno, lympho, and spleno. From the early misunderstandings of legal exemptions and vestigial organs, navigating through the bitter, spite-fueled scientific feuds of the 19th century.
All the way to modern billion-dollar immunotherapies and the ongoing mapping of human neuroanatomy.
And this entire intricate ecosystem, the bone marrow, the localized lymph nodes, the thymus, and the highly specialized spleen, is operating inside you right now.
And it's worth noting that unlike the cardiovascular system, the lymphatic network does not possess a central muscular pump like the heart.
Oh, that's right.
The circulation of this fluid is driven entirely by the mechanical compression of your own skeletal muscle contractions and the rhythm of your breathing.
That's amazing.
Every time you walk, stretch, or take a deep breath, you are physically, manually pumping this fluid through your body, keeping your internal surveillance network online and active.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought to consider. If it took the collective brilliance of modern science until the year 2015 to discover an entirely new, critical network of lymphatic vessels hiding right inside the human brain, completely overturning 300 years of established, unquestioned medical dogma.
Yeah.
What other fundamental anatomical secrets are currently hiding in plain sight inside your body, just waiting for a curious researcher to look at them differently?